It's a very conditional setup where the child is growing up. It's like you are worth how many marks you got in history. Can you imagine? If you have not got whatever, 90% or 95%, that's not your history paper of the second term, but that's who you are. I could be in my 50s and 60s and I'm still holding up to standards that were kind of spelt out to me in my childhood. There's such a huge difference between feeling bad for something wrong I've done, feeling as though something is wrong with me. We don't tell kids in second grade that this is guilt and this is shame. I'm angry, I'm hopping mad and I'm crying and I'm thinking I'm not supposed to be angry and I'm not supposed to cry either. So how difficult is that? And how neurotic is that? She says there's this one man. He's got to fix the car. He's also got to give me a hug when I'm feeling sad. He's got to help me with the PowerPoint I have to make at the office. What's he going to do?
Hello and welcome to an all new episode of Brightlife Talkies. Today we have Meena Iyer, who is one of my favorite people to work with through the journey of Brightlife. I say this often, I think the best part and a real privilege of building Brightlife is working with people who are constantly in a whole state of empowered and kind of feed into that energy as well.
Thank you.
And for reference, I love to introduce Meena. Meena is a psychotherapist, a coach. She's been practicing for the last 11 years. Her approach is a mix of Western and Eastern modalities, and she deals with a diverse set of clients. I can say that from data because her youngest clients are aged 19,
yes,
and the oldest is well over 50s.
Yes.
So, she works well with like a whole diverse set of people. Because, one of the things that I've understood about Meena is a lot of your work and approach looks at where is the issue coming from, right? And the issue, I believe that, comes a lot from the childhood, from our past. And you specialize in a modality known as the inner child healing. And like for me at least, when I think of inner child healing, you are one name that definitely pops into my head. So let's dive into all of those deeper.
Thank you so much, Krutika. Thank you. Lovely being here. Really happy to be here and for this opportunity to talk to you and to talk to our folks, our listeners.
Amazing. So, Meena, I'm personally also very curious. How did the switch from being an advertising professional to being a therapist happen? What was that journey like? What triggered that?
Yeah. So if I were to begin with, I kind of transitioned back work-wise to Delhi in 2008, and it was a difficult time. Two children in grades 11 and 8, and I was making this transition, coming back to a very different market. Work here was different. I was working as an associate sales director with Turner, which is the company that owns Cartoon Network, Pogo, HBO. It was a high pressure sales job. And coming here, there were so many changes to deal with. To start with, my children had to learn Hindi. So from there on, right? And there was a lot of change. So by about 2008 mid, I knew that I have to do something drastic. I'd found I'd become quite a closed person who was constantly cribbing, complaining about things outside me. So like I tell all my clients this, I think the point where the focus shifts is when we look and see, what am I doing about this whole thing? What can I do to change things? Or where can I take responsibility for what's going on with me? Okay, so which is what I did, and that was kind of my starting point with a very popular self-help series of workshops, and that's where I started out. But then the journey got more and more intense. I found that the changes were happening. Hello, I'm at the wheel and I'm driving, and then many processes, courses and streams of work came to me. And by 2011, I was ready to quit my corporate job and try and make this work as in something that would support me financially as well.
Sorry.
So, which also included, a master's in counseling psychology. I did the certification in clinical hypnotherapy. A bunch of things had already started by then, and which I have continued. So,
Right.
like my last day at work was probably June something 2011.
Wow.
Yeah.
Lovely. So nice to hear. And from what I understand, like a lot of what you do with your clients right now is, no matter what the issue is, I think a lot of your focus is on where it's stemming from, and it's usually the childhood in the kind of work that I have seen you doing with most people, and like when I think of inner child healing, I think of Meena Iyer.
Wow. Thank you.
So I would love for you to share what is the key that's kind of lying in our childhood as such, and how does that really work?
Right. So, let's say a person comes into coaching or therapy, okay, or even a group scenario, or even something like, a kind of a group learning, okay, and they could be in their 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s. They're sitting at that point where life has become unbearable, right? And it's like, I can't continue like this anymore. And when pain becomes that sharp, is when a person will seek, will actually trust another person to go and tell their story to. And when I say another person, I'm talking about a professional, not like their best friend or their partner or their parent, okay? And maybe they've already done that, and it's even that is not working. And that's when they say, okay, I need to talk to a professional. So then, if, like I said, 20s, 30s, 40s, however many years have gone, the problem actually started very long back. And so, if I have a problem in my 30s or 40s, there is some way that I have been leading my life, coping with the situations that came up, which is not working now. Okay, and so how did those ways of coping, which in psychology we say it's all about patterns, patterns, and patterns. Now, how did those patterns get constructed? They got constructed, they started getting constructed from the moment I picked up messages from the outside world, what other people were saying to me, asking me to do, and then I started responding to them. And therefore, the importance of childhood. That's the first environment that any human being becomes part of. Because before we go work in an office, before we get married to somebody, we are born into a household of people with their own unique personalities. That household is in a certain socio-economic strata, it's in a particular country or city. And so all of that makes, this environment, sort of this background, this context into which I step in. And I start learning, like, what is safe to start with? How do people speak? What are the messages they're telling me? What are the goals they're setting before me? And so everything that I've oriented myself to started really long back. Therefore, childhood, the conditioning of the people around me, the environment around me, the culture around me, everything begins there.
Got it. And you said something about like patterns, right? Like
Yeah.
how are patterns really made? It's not something we're always conscious about, right? Like
Yes.
especially, I think
We're never conscious about, sorry Krutika, I'm interrupting. For most people, your pattern is reality.
right,
It's like, it's your default. It's like, I don't have any other way to be.
correct,
Okay, so if somebody is yelling at me, whether I disengage, whether I yell back with equal or more energy, whether I just, go into a fight or flight or freeze, like I completely shut
Or a
down.
shutdown, exactly.
Yeah. For me, that's my default. That's the only way to be that I know.
Right. And we're never conscious about our patterns.
Yes, till we start working, till we start talking to somebody and they start asking us, okay, could it be some other way? Like, was this the only option available? How about, and where did you see this? And what is this kind of behavior doing to you? And what is it bringing into that conflict? It's already a conflict, right? The situation I took up as an example. So it's already a conflict. And if you're going to yell louder, what usually happens? So that's how.
And when you said we hear or we receive messages in our childhood, I can imagine some messages are very explicit, right?
Right.
And some messages can be very, very implicit as well.
Sure.
Right. And what is the impact of those messages sometimes that we really even we say things very lightly, like, good kids don't get scared, for example. Right?
Yes.
So
yes.
that is a message. Like, I have worked with you, so I know that you talk about like messages resulting in emotional wounds, and I'd love for you to explain that to the rest of our listeners as well.
So let's talk about messages. Messages in general, if a message is said once, it's just a message. Now, messages get repeated because let's not forget, let's say person in their 20s, okay? Now they're in their 20s. So 20 years back when they were born, the mother and the father and maybe the grandparents or older siblings, whoever, uncles, aunts, they repeated those messages till those messages became beliefs and then they became values. And based on those values, this person constructed habits and then attitudes and then their entire personality and identity. That is how deep the messages go. Okay, so like you gave an example. Let's just look at messages that have an impact. Some of the messages we talked about. Now, let's talk of something that will bring a little bit of culture also into this, right? Let's say the third child in a family. Let's just assume a child that's born in the third position in the family. And let's just say the parents have been kind of open and lenient with the first two children. So let's say the third child gets overloaded with messages like, your elder brother or and then your sister, they haven't really studied hard. They haven't brought glory to the family name. Let's just say, okay. Now it's all up to you. Okay. Now, if somebody is going to get these messages time and again, imagine the pressure firstly that child is going to go through. Like, I cannot drop the ball on my history exam or my badminton tournament. I have to just go all out because the family name depends on me to become, famous or notorious or just, somewhere lost. So that's an example of pressure being put on a child, saying that you are worth what you do, right? We call this like, it's a very conditional setup where the child is growing up. It's like you are worth how many marks you got in history. Can you imagine? If you have not got whatever, 90% or 95%, then that's who you are. That's not your history paper of the second term, but that's who you are. And that's where I said, like, when I went all the way from, message to pattern to attitude to identity. My identity, therefore, then when I grow up is like how much money I make, what kind of house I live in, what kind of car I drive, which kind of gym I go to, how much I weigh, and all of those things that become like my report cards. So the report cards never end. I could be in my 50s and 60s and I'm still holding up to standards that were kind of spelt out to me in my childhood.
Got it.
Correct?
And like when, what are some other kind of childhood messages that you have seen that, your clients have picked up and like, how does that impact people like today, for example, right? I'm sure you have like a wide ranging view on what's happening as such. So what are some of those messages as such that people pick up on the way?
So the messages start very early on. Like for instance, if there's a little infant that cries too often, okay, some babies cry out loud, right? Now, if a mother or a caregiver or grandparent has a rule that every time this child cries, I'm not going to go pick them up. So that's a child's need for attention, let's just say. It starts right there. That if I'm going to, I need to measure the number of times that I ask for support or for, attention, or like little babies go through a lot of problems. Like, they could be having some like colic or gas in the stomach and, they need somebody to just pick them up or comfort them. They could be feeling cold, they could be feeling hot, they could be whatever, okay? So it starts right there, saying it's not okay for you to demand attention. And now this person is probably going to go and live in some very uncomfortable situations physiologically and psychologically and not ask for support because it's not okay to ask for support, to ask for help when I'm feeling uncomfortable. So it starts right there. That's one, childhood, like don't hog up all the attention. It's Okay, or and then of course when the messages get verbal and the child has access to language, it could be something like don't think you're the most important person in this house. Okay, or don't keep troubling me, don't keep bothering me. A simple thing like, let's just say there's a conflict going on in the house and the child needs to study peacefully because there's an exam the next day. That could be a message could be that, grown-ups behave like this, take it or leave it. That could create a wound. Again, if the child is fearful, so again, I know we've talked a lot about emotions, that fear is not okay. If a child has a fear of, let's just say, standing up on stage and reciting a nursery rhyme, that's where they start. And if the parental message constantly is that you've just got to go and do it, like, why are you thinking so much about it? That child does not have the space to communicate their fear. Or what is it about climbing up on stage and talking that they're fearful about? So fear is not okay. Asking for attention is not okay. Anger is definitely, in most places, it's like, this, and that cuts across cultures. People are not okay with a child, expressing anger or
throwing a tantrum.
Yeah.
We saw that the kind of people you work with, sometimes, like there are some broad categories that people have shared that they deal with, right? And I would love for you to shed some light on how is the childhood conditioning manifesting in what's really going on right now. So like when people have a lot of struggle to like regulate their emotions, right? Like either they get too overwhelmed or they cry a lot. What's really happening as such? Can you shed some light on that?
Sure. So the thing with emotions is, the number one thing is that in most cultures, in most homes, emotions are not welcome. Unless somebody has been through a structured journey of self-help, coaching, therapy, various things, they're not okay to first acknowledge emotion, that emotion is there, and then to express emotion, and then to express emotion, safely, in an appropriate way, and not regret having expressed the emotion. So it's a whole cycle, right? So the first problem with emotion is saying that if I suppress emotion, what's going to happen? It's all going to get collected, and one day when I'm least expecting, there's going to be a volcanic eruption of emotion. Secondly, the proportion of that emotion in response to the, let's say, precipitating event or situation, there's going to be no proportion. So if I feel bad about something and I keep on brushing it under the carpet, in this case, the carpet is like literally me, my body, my psyche, okay? And suddenly one day something very silly happens, like somebody overtakes me from the left, and it's not even a very harmful situation, but just very slightly somebody's attempting. And in that moment, suppose I have my outburst saying, and what's the thought running in my mind? Everybody is out to get me. Nobody listens to me. There's no order. I live in this chaotic world where I'm at danger. I don't even feel safe. So imagine how I'm going to respond to that. So that's what happens with emotion. So, and the other thing we're saying is, a lot of times we don't sit, as kids, they tell us colors and put the triangular puzzle piece in the triangular slot, but they don't tell us the difference between guilt and shame, for instance. Okay, this is a big one. We just have we just have one general feeling of feeling that we've done something wrong, but there's such a huge difference between feeling bad for something wrong I've done, feeling as though something is wrong with me. We don't tell kids in second grade that this is guilt and this is shame. And shame particularly, Krutika, is one of those things that is most difficult to work through. And because we don't acknowledge shame and we don't work through it, most of the time adults, people in their 20s and 30s, will find shame coming and interfering with anger, with sadness, with everything. So they perceive all other emotions also through the lens of shame, because they're saying, I have no business to feel this emotion and I'm ashamed that I am. Which is why I saw a very humorous Insta reel the other day saying, I'm angry, I'm hopping mad and I'm crying. And I'm thinking, I'm not supposed to be angry and I'm not supposed to cry either. So how difficult is that? And how neurotic is that actually?
I always said that we have never really taught the difference between guilt and shame. I remember this one, very close friend of mine. She was dealing with something and she says, मेरे को अच्छा लग रहा है या मेरे को गंदा लग रहा है. I'm like, they are just two, like broad categories.
Polar opposites, yeah.
And they're broad categories, right?
Yeah.
Like, are you feeling optimistic? Are you feeling great? Are you feeling hopeful? Are you feeling empowered? And when she says ganda, I'm like, are you feeling let down? Are you feeling taken for granted, right? Like, what is, like, I mean, it's very important because unless we kind of acknowledge, it's very difficult to even deal with what's showing up as such, right? Like,
Yes.
I think acknowledgement is really key in that sense. And I'm sure, like, childhood conditioning and unmet needs in
Absolutely,
childhood,
yes.
they show up in relationships, right?
Yes.
And like, do people come to you for relationship issues? I know they do.
Yes, they do. In fact, that was part 2 of your question.
Yes.
You asked about emotional regulation, and before that you said what are some of the common things. So emotional regulation and understanding, acknowledging and expressing emotions is something that's going to have a bearing on every relationship. And it's all about relationships, right? Starting with my relationship with me. How do I feel about me? Like I said, do I love myself? And now there's so much talk about self-love, and we should talk about that in some time. So, do I like myself even? Am I comfortable in my own skin? Or do I just hate myself and get through my days trying to mask that with the things I tell myself, right? Or I cover myself up with. So, relationship with myself, relationship with my significant other, could be partner, husband, spouse, also relationship with my, I'll use the term family of origin, parents, siblings, and maybe the new family that I'm part of, relationship with colleagues, relationship with my friends, all of this. So yes, we have, because everything, the closer the relationship, you see, the relationships will be like a mirror. Right. So the more your issues are going to get reflected back to you, and for both people. And it's like a kind of a play field where everything comes out, all the emotions, all the drama, all the unmet childhood needs. Because you see, our psyche is so clever. It's not going to stop getting that need met.
Yeah.
It's like saying, like a child says, suppose, mom, buy me PlayStation. Okay, now, okay, okay, Diwali, you'll buy me. Okay, Christmas, okay, next year, okay, next birthday. But till the mother buys the PlayStation, he's not going to stop asking. Yeah. Okay, so our needs are like that. They didn't get met in childhood. Okay, dad, mom were too busy, whatever happened, maybe one was abroad, maybe the marriage ended, maybe there was another partner, a foster parent, a step parent, maybe whatever happened. You think this person's going to stop asking for their needs to get met? Never. So I want my colleagues to meet my needs, I want my friends to meet my needs, and my significant other, oh my God, that is the place. Now everything that's left unmet, now this one person has to satisfy, which is why it gets so difficult.
Make relationships
right?
work.
This lady who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, Elizabeth Gilbert, has written a beautiful book about it called Committed. And she says the problem is we come from, caveman days, and then we come from joint families and, villages where there's uncles and aunts and, so many people. So, and now we've got this one man, and it's written from a woman's perspective. She says there's this one man. He's got to fix the car. He's also got to give me a hug when I'm feeling sad. He's got to help me with the PowerPoint I have to make at the office. What's he going to do? It's crazy. But then, which is why relationships are difficult. And a part of it is, like I said, social conditioning, and maybe we'll talk some more about that. But yes, relationships, and in both areas, that is the personal and the professional.
Correct.
Are a large part of some of the work that I do with clients that consult with me.
Yeah, like I can imagine, like, unmet needs even showing up at the workplace, right?
Yes.
Like if I don't know, constantly felt, let's say, unacknowledged at home, every time I think my boss is going to ignore me, or someone's going to give me like a nasty feedback, I won't be able to take it well, for example, right?
Yes.
Like, I mean, it's because I think the need of getting validation was not met then, and it's
Yes.
just like waiting to get met anywhere. As
Absolutely.
such. Right.
Absolutely.
Got it.
Yeah.
And you said 3 things. You said messages, wounds, and patterns. Like, how are they linked? What leads to what? Like, we'd love to learn from you.
Amazing. That's a great way to look at it. See, a message first gets internalized with constant repetition. It's the same message being delivered. Okay. Interestingly, a baby's brain neurologically is like a very nascent stage of development. So children only learn by repetition.
Right.
Okay, so actually, even if it's a negative message or a message like "I don't like your face" or "you should have been a boy," assuming, and I'm giving you the most drastic examples, or typically I hear things like the color of your skin is wrong or something, or. So the message is that, but in fact, when the child hears the same message again and again, strangely, it's reassuring. Because repetition is reassuring. It brings predictability. It brings certainty.
And I'd also
So a child won't say, please don't tell me I'm not the right skin color, because actually that's what you've been saying.
Yeah.
From 2 years, that's what you'll say when I'm 12 also.
And I think people are happy preserving their own version of like perceived reality, right? Like
Yes.
I mean, like initially if you give them certain messages, they've probably built up their version of this is true. And then when you send something contradictory, it just shakes up the system entirely as such. Got it. So that's what message is.
So it becomes sacrosanct, it becomes a belief. Okay. Right. Now, in order to cope with that belief and be okay, because that's not how the rest of the world seems to be operating, I develop a pattern which is a coping mechanism to counter that belief.
Okay.
Okay. So let me give you an example of that. So let's just say that a person says that for instance, a message like, since we're talking about physical appearance, okay, suppose a child is told you're not pleasing, or you're not attractive, or you're not pretty, and therefore for you to get noticed you need to do something to be noticed. So either you have to be very good at sports, or you have to be very good at studies or at painting. And so the entire sum of who you are is going to be evaluated on how fast you run or play some sport, or how many marks you get in math. So then what is the coping mechanism? I've got to do well in math, because without math or without badminton, I'm a nobody, because I don't look good. Nobody's going to give me a second look. I'm never going to be noticed.
Right.
So there's a unidimensional sort of a one-sided growth of that child, saying, there's no confidence, and there's actually very low self-esteem. It's not me, it's the maths marks that are great. Okay.
Got it.
So that was, you said pattern and goals and then wounds. And so it's actually a very deep wound to be told again and again, because what does that message mean? You're not pretty, okay? Means that you don't fit in.
Right.
Okay, you don't fit in, you don't belong, loved, and you're not worthy of being loved.
Yeah.
Right? You're not lovable because you're not beautiful. And so you've got to do a whole bunch of things. So it's a huge wound, and one can spend an entire lifetime filling that wound with accomplishments and achievements which are going to counter the lack of beauty and bring you up to speed with where everybody else is.
So Meena, I know you work with like as I said, like a diverse set of clients.
Yes.
Are there any broad challenges that you're seeing? And I know that I think there's a whole generation that is woken up to working on their emotional well-being post the pandemic, right?
Yes, that's
right. But are there particular challenges that you see spanning across different groups of people that you work with?
Absolutely. I think different. When I say different groups of people, some of the things that I want to say straight off is that, as was my observation before and now with and after with Brightlife also, is that more women reach out for therapy. And I have a joke about it, if you permit me, saying that like there's all these jokes about men don't ask for directions. They don't ask for directions on the road. They don't ask for directions
in life.
So, but whichever way that is, and I'm being flippant, but that's changing, and I think men are, coming, and they're very slowly coming into this work of coaching and, having faith in the whole process of talking to another person about their problems. Now, amongst women, which is the larger demographic, gender-wise, I'm, like you said, very heartened to see people in their 20s. Now, people in their 20s and let's say early 30s, typically we're talking about the transition from home to, let's say, a city of work. So typically, early, adjustments with work, early adjustments venturing into the whole area of being in a significant relationship. Okay, what kind of partner, what kind of person that I'm being with, what are my relationship patterns, what do I not like, what are the reasons that are not working for me. That's one area, which, and I don't mean actually not even just significant relationships, but even the deeper friendships that we're talking about. Okay, like in a group of friends, what is the dynamic that happens? Okay. And most important, it's really important that to say this, that people in their 20s are opening up to talking about, in fact, their core relationships with their parents. Earlier days, it was quite suppressed, and the fact remains that in India we support our children through post graduation and everything financially, and there is a certain amount of that dependence on them, but the fact that my parents are paying for my masters doesn't give them the right to decide who I should get married to, if I were to put it that literally, right? So fighting some of these norms, and the parents are being conditioned by the grandparents, so you're being conditioned by your grandparents' view of what an arranged marriage should look like, and things like that, right? So people in their 20s, like I said, typically these are some of the things we're talking about. We're also talking about very long stored issues with respect to relationship with either of the parents, or even something like conflicts between the parents. It could be, or it could be maybe even something like a health issue developed by one of the parents that led to a sort of lopsided family dynamic. Saying there's too much dependence on the mother was ill, she was unavailable, so a daughter did not get that kind of nurturing by the mother, and so she had to depend on the father or something like that. So all these issues, also people come from joint families, talking about how there is almost a certain political system that gets followed in many joint families here in India, and which can be very limiting. So I've worked with some of that. Now, if we look at 30s again, it could be about, for women, it could be about balancing career and family.
Right.
The decision to have a baby, not have a baby. Once the kids are there, whether to take something lighter, more flexible, work on a full time, something like that. And going forward like that, right? For instance, very typically we're talking women in their 40s could be addressing something like empty nest syndrome. It's become so common now for students to go abroad to study, not even for masters, but even for undergrads.
Right. And thanks for bringing out the empty nest. I think it's just not talked about enough, right? It's very real. I know for a fact, because I've seen it, with women around me, where the role of an active caregiver is sort of over or redundant in some sense, and there is a whole there is loss and confusion of what next, right? And how do you work with people who have
certainly
and what is that what does your work with them look like?
So with an empty nester, one of the basic things is that for a person to, whether you've developed a career or not, okay, it's, if my entire life centered around sending these two people to to work, and these two young people to college, to school, cooking, cleaning and everything, it means that I get my sense of self-worth and purpose and meaning from my role as a mother. So, and we know that all of psychology is about building a strong sense of self that's not dependent on any outside circumstance or situation falling in place. So for people to develop that, and strangely, what I also find is that certain other things coincide with empty nest. For instance, physiologically, a woman, while she's going through empty nest, could also be menopausal. Okay. She could be going through maybe waning attention from her significant partner. So sometimes these things really come. And for all of them, there is really no substitute to creating a strong bond with someone who understands you and who kind of handholds you through this process of really rebuilding your sense of self anew. So we now hear of some very successful women entrepreneurs who've, in that empty nest phase, they've launched a new business.
Yeah, right.
Right? And that business actually is their new baby, but it's great, isn't it?
Meena, I know you've been working with a lot of, the NRI users. At least, this is something that's
Yes, with Bright Life,
yes,
certainly. Yes.
certainly. And
Yes.
is there a common pattern to that you're seeing that is there a common challenge that one's facing? Because I personally, my personal take is that I think when we think of mental emotional health, it is also derived from our social fabric, right?
Yes.
And being away from home, being away from family, and it's a whole different culture with a different set of challenges.
Yes.
And that can be hard, right? And coping alone can be challenging.
I know,
So
yeah.
is there a broad trend or pattern that you're seeing? And in some conversations, I think working with a therapist who understands their cultural background also is
It's very important.
right? So is there a similar observation that you have? What is your take as such?
Whichever way to have Indians living abroad access to a therapist from their own country who understands their culture and their challenges, I think it's great because you see, let's look at this whole segment, this whole demographic of people who are living there. What's taken them to let's just say to Europe or to Australia or whatever? Mostly it's work. It's either work. It's mostly work now, right?
Mostly work, yeah,
we
yeah.
were not talking. Probably it would be a much older generation who followed a partner to another country, but it's mostly work. And therefore, while a lot of them have, the success or the motivation to achieve has taken you there, probably a certain kind of assessment of how is it going to be there, how is my world going to look like, what are some of the things that maybe living in India I have and I take for granted, but when I go there I don't know how I'm going to cope because there's socially, how is it going to be, what kind of people are going to be my friends, what kind of activities am I going to be part of, every single thing, like from it won't get dark, right? Like we've got that seasonality of and how do people cope with such things because you were not born there, the temperature, the kind of food you get there, everything is so different. So I think we did one of these webinars a while back on self-awareness, right, which is about if I know myself and say which of these is really crucial for me. And then maybe I'd be better equipped saying these are the kind of skills, these are the kind of coping strengths I need to be in that environment. And this is, I'm saying, when everything else is normal. Add to that the fact that I have certain patterns which don't work for me. I have patterns where I can be really mean to myself, and I can't be kind and gentle with myself even in the adjustment process. Forget that's just with me. And then with the kind of people I meet, who if they are from a similar environment like mine would have similar problems, who if they're from a completely different culture would have like, oh, why are you taking so long to get used to the weather,
Yeah.
Get done with it, get over it,
What I've heard is your peers saying why, and even therapists outside actually saying, why do your parents have to be so bothered about your wedding?
Okay. Wow.
Right? Because how as Indians we relate to parents versus how the world
Yes.
outside sometimes
Yes.
relates to, a parent's relationship as an adult is very different.
Yeah, one of my clients clearly told me that I'm talking to you because 3 of the therapists in the country where she lives have told her to go and get divorced. Now, that completely shocked me on 2 levels. One is, we are all, a lot of the time in India, we are all about, once there's a child in the family, we're all about making the marriage work. okay, and it would be extremely difficult to justify ending a marriage after the birth of a child, okay. That's one thing. The second thing is, I was actually appalled, Krutika, that a counselor or a therapist or a coach would advise somebody to do something.
Right.
And I'm seriously thinking, how professional is this? So I'm thinking, oh, you are from a different culture, and are you also biased that in India people do this? And so I need to tell this person, you need to go get a divorce, because that's the last thing you should tell anybody. We never tell anybody what to do. Because if I ask you a set of questions and I direct you and say, what would work for your life? Why don't you look at this? What are your alternatives?
Right.
What are the things you're holding sacrosanct and still trying to fix your life? So on both these levels, I found, like, A, like the culture is different, and B, because they think in some way that they're more open or advanced, they can say something like this. It's not, I don't think that's okay at all.
No. And Meena, for everyone who is listening to us, what are some harsh truths you want to share with as like a coach as such?
Yeah, so Krutika, like I was saying earlier also, that people come into a coaching or a therapeutic process when they are really in pain. So you could say harsh truth, but the reality is that pain is inevitable. We all go through pain. How we go through that pain, how we choose to respond to that pain, can prevent that pain from converting into suffering. So while pain is inevitable, suffering is optional, right? And the reality is that really there is no growth without pain, because when we push against obstacles, and sometimes if we're going to push against obstacles, we're going to get hurt, we're going to get injured, we're going to get wounded, and in the process of healing those wounds, we grow and we evolve, right? And since we're talking about pain, the other thing again that people will say is, sometimes it sounds like, my goodness, this is so sweet and innocent and naive, is that, how come I get along with everybody, but that one person I really care about hurts me the most? Okay, the reason is twofold. The one person who hurts you the most is because you give them the power to hurt you the most. And the same is happening the other way also, where we hurt the one that we love the most because we take the liberty of telling them, of being maybe honest with them or harsh with them, or in other ways we give them pain because they're closest to us. And so if I were to knit all of this together, what is an ideal world or an ideal relationship is one where we're saying pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. How can I be an unconditional commitment to the growth and the evolution of the people in my life? In fact, that is the classic definition that so many years back this psychologist Scott Peck said. His definition of love was the willingness to extend yourself to any extent. I mean, to go to any extent to be there for the spiritual evolution of yourself or the other.
Got it.
So yeah,
So
thank you.
with that, we'd love to wrap today's episode with you. Thank you so much, Meena, for sharing some very interesting insights on our childhood conditioning, relationships, how life is out in the not in the US, but how life is outside of India, away from social fabric that we enjoy in our country as well. And we love to dive into more such conversations with you. We will come back with a part 2 soon.
Thank you, Krutika. Lovely being here.